Thank you, Ariel. Happy to do so. So welcome everyone. My name is Frank Aswani. I'm the CEO of African Venture Philanthropy Alliance. We are really thrilled to be partnering with Sankalp to host a series of webinars that are looking at issues specifically addressing challenges affecting the most vulnerable in our communities around this COVID-19 crisis. So this is the third webinar we've held over the last couple of weeks. We've addressed issues from the informal economy to food, and we're really excited today to be hosting a really great panel of people who are playing and actively involved in the space of education provision, the most vulnerable. And AVPA is excited to be part of this process. We are a network of social investors who are working to increase the flow of financial and non-financial resources into social investments on the continent. We are headquartered in Nairobi, with offices in Johannesburg and Lagos. And we've in the process of responding to COVID-19, we have set up communities of response in Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. So any of you who are interested to join a group of people who are working towards addressing issues related to COVID-19, please feel free to reach out to us after this. You will see our Twitter handles on the slides towards the end, and our email address. So please feel free to reach out to either Nancy or myself. I'm very excited to be doing this series in partnership with Ariel and Intellecap. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nancy, and thank you so much to Intellecap once again for enabling this series of webinars to keep going. And we're super excited to have all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Again, welcome to everybody. I see we have 39 participants and growing. So thank you very much. I'll go straight into introducing our first speaker, Henry Benson. He is the director of CASME, Center for Advancement of Science and Mathematical Education. He is here representing an organization based in South Africa. Over to you, Henry.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. And thanks to AVPA and Sankalp for, I think, facilitating this. It's very important conversations, particularly as we look at the most vulnerable in access.
Henry,
so you're going to do a poll, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So just a couple of housekeeping items for the participants. Firstly, I'm Ariel from the Sankalp team. Thank you for joining today. We will be taking questions in the chat box for all of the participants today. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box, and we'll be fielding those to the speakers once they all wrap up. And we'll have about at least half an hour for a Q&A for you all to pose your questions to the speakers today and put your contributions in. We did want to start really quickly today just with a quick poll before we get into to Henry's presentation, and you should see the poll pop up on your screen. What we want to know from all of you today is what you think some of the biggest barriers are for e-learning, specifically in informal settlements. So this whole series is focusing on the lower income consumers, and we really want to see what some of those biggest challenges are. So I will give you another about 30 seconds or so to put your answers into the poll, and then I'll share those results. So just go ahead and select which of these challenges you think is the most challenging. Is it access to electricity, access to internet, access to hardware like a computer or a smartphone? Is it the teacher's ability to deliver content from, from historically a physical in-person platform to now an electronic one? I am not seeing on my side that anyone has voted, so I don't know if it's a glitch on my side. Margaret, are you able to see anything from your side by any chance? No. Okay. Well, in that case,
yes, Ariel. Yes, we can see. I can see about 31 people have voted so far. So maybe we give it another 10 seconds, and we can close the poll.
Okay, perfect. We'll give it another 5 or 10 seconds. Thanks for that, George. All right, I'll give it another 2 seconds and then I'm gonna end the poll. All right, so I don't know if it's a glitch on my side, but I can't see any results. So George, if you can see it, feel free to walk us through, but I think it's a challenge on my side.
I just shared it with you, Ariel. You should be able to see it now.
I can see the results.
Okay, go for it, Nancy, because I think I'm having a technical issue.
It's now disappeared. But I think it said 47% said all of the above.
Okay, unsurprisingly, it's a mixed issue.
Yeah.
So super. So thanks everyone for your inputs. And Henry, over to you.
Thanks very much. So yes, as I've been introduced, I'm Henry Benson. I'm the director of CASNI. We're a non-profit organization working in South Africa. Maybe I should just say that the work that we've been doing currently, particularly under COVID-19 and the lockdown that we're facing here in South Africa, is really, and what I'm reporting on and talking about is work that's been done in partnership. So in partnership with a number of organizations, and you can see their logos on the screen there. In particular, I want to mention NASCI, which is the National Association for Social Change Entities in Education, which is a membership-based body for nonprofits working in education, and also the Civil Society Coalition, which is an association of organizations really working for the most vulnerable. Next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about the current activities, what we knew instinctively as an organization with a long history of working in rural and township communities is that we would, so what we saw, I think initially with the lockdown and the closing of schools in particular, and we know this is affecting many millions of children around the world, is that we knew that content was becoming available in many forms. So there was a very swift and agile turnaround from the private sector and from the non-profit sector in making available content in various forms. What we were anecdotally aware of through our own work is that we needed to evaluate the level of access and engagement amongst teachers, learners, and parents. And so what we did was we started doing some research around this particular aspect to, in a way, sort of really bring some data to the table in terms of what we knew about access. And I'll talk a little bit about the results of that engagement with groups of learners, teachers, and parents. And this also then fed into another research project, which was the JET Education Services Research Bootcamp, which was taking place, the Unlock the Lockdown and Open Up Your Thinking Bootcamp, which they organized with 150 or so researchers from around South Africa, as well as Africa and the world, who were looking into responses from the sector. So the one thing that so as a result of this sort of opening up of the sector in terms of making content available, we started engaging in a process of curating content, actually looking at the content to see what was available and asking some critical questions, for example, around zero rating, data, accessibility, also alignment to the curriculum, these kinds of issues. The other thing that we were very keenly interested in, based on some of the results of the research that we'd been doing, is the level of engagement of parents and the ability of parents really to be able to keep continuity of learning going in the home, knowing very well that parents are not teachers. Parents are, and have been suddenly faced with the responsibility of now guiding learning in their homes, and whether they had access necessarily to the resources that they needed, whether they be online or not. And then the other element that we're looking at is the low-tech and data light kind of support initiatives that are out there. So what we've seen is lots of really fantastic online resources, but even in those cases, they're not necessarily low tech or data light. If we can move to the next slide, there'll be some reflections on these initiatives. So what we found in our research was very promisingly is that in the township and rural communities that we engaged with through the surveys and the research, is that 80% of learners had taken home with them prior to the lockdown some paper-based resource. And this was a critical learning in terms of how we respond and how we make learning opportunities available in the home. What we did find, though, in our research is that engagement across all platforms, particularly the electronic platforms, including radio and television, was actually quite low, with most learners indicating that they were only tuning in, that first of all, they were not even aware of the radio and television broadcast to some extent. I think about 50 to 60% of the learners that we engage with and teachers indicated that they were not aware. Those that were aware, very few of them were actually engaged in tuning into those sources. Then just in terms of the content curation work, with all the resources that were available, what we realized is that there was a need to engage in a conversation, a critical conversation really, around what do we mean by zero rating, and also what is data free, what is data light, what is free and open. So for example, we're quite concerned in terms of particularly vulnerable communities and communities that don't normally have the access to resources, is that with the sort of sudden opening up of the commercial space, with commercial providers saying, here's a resource, it's free, it's available for now. And I think I emphasize the for now, is because we're concerned that we have a sort of a hook into what maybe is a solution that doesn't have legs into the future in a post-lockdown scenario or a return to school. And we still know that learners will be constrained. I mean, in the South African scenarios, we're looking at a very phased return to school, which could stretch on for months and months and months. So we know many, many learners are still going to be out of school. And so if those resources don't really have a true open quality in terms of Creative Commons licensing, for example, and that paywalls maybe are reintroduced at some point, that we have a challenge. Even then with zero rating, I think we need to critically engage with the zero rating. So the one thing is that telcos are offering resources zero rated, yes, and there's been a big campaign and push from our side, from civil society, as well as government, to get more and more content zero rated. But the challenge there is also is what's the quality of that zero rating? What's the quality of the initial connection that a learner actually has? So for example, do they have a device? These questions came up in the poll. Do they have electricity? Do they have, and how heavy is the data requirement of the content that needs to be downloaded? I mean, we can go on to a zero rated site, but it can still take you half an hour to download a PDF document that's very data heavy. And then is it really an accessible document that you can actually use for learning? And then the last point in terms of the lessons learned is that what we found is that parents were really struggling. Even the most well-resourced parents in suburban schools with access to internet connectivity were really struggling with how to actually engage with their children. So if we look at the most vulnerable communities, what we realized, what we found is that there aren't really non-specialist support resources in form of paper that parents can use to support learning in their homes. And so, and maybe I should just mention one point. So recently, just very recently, the HSRC, the Human Sciences Research Council in South Africa, have put out a paper based on some modeling they've done of the TIMSS data. And what that has shown is that we are going to see massive impact in terms of learning gains or learning losses, actually, particularly with our most vulnerable communities. And next slide, please. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I think we should be okay. So I think the one thing that we did find is in so with the flood of resources available, is that we really are trying to drink from a fire hose. And that was what really motivated and drove us to start working on curating content. So really just being selective about what's available. Next slide, please. Great. So I think I'll wrap it up now with this last. So we say help needed, and I think this is kind of really where we're calling on all stakeholders and partners. And there is a lot of collaborative work happening already. But what the work that's currently happening is to try and create a trusted single entry point to approved content and support. I think this is really critical, and I think maybe in some ways it's where we need our government sector and the official holders of education in our system to really sort of support good, strong messaging around what is expected of parents, what is expected of learners at this particular moment in time, and also point them to a sort of a credible, trusted single entry point. The sort of responding to data light solutions, what we have seen is that there are a lot of sort of organic, emerging WhatsApp Messenger type solutions. So maybe just to say that the challenges that we're observing in this particular space are around that there isn't a coordinated or collaborative effort, and also the pedagogical application of how you use a messaging platform to deliver learning experiences I think it needs some rethinking. And what we've seen is there are some efforts now coming together, and we're trying through our work with NASCI and other stakeholders to bring together the different players in this space to be able to structure learning on a messaging platform. At the moment, what you do kind of get to see the sort of puff and pass kind of approach, where lots of information again goes across learners' timelines or parents' timelines or teachers' timelines. And really it's about sort of coordinating that and structuring learning. So providing small bits of information in very data light ways to support learners. And then I think just technical capacity for the sector to be able to convert content into a way that is accessible and meaningful and useful for the education sector. And then not only the technical capacity to deliver the content, but also then the learning and content support. So what happens once a learner gets some content through their WhatsApp or their Telegram or their timeline, is then how is that, what's the follow-up support that's required in order for us to really ensure learning takes place. So I think we are faced with enormous challenges, and we do know that there are going to be learning losses. But all these efforts are trying to sort of rally around mitigating those losses. And I think the key takeaways that we've learned from the research that we've been doing and the collaboration work that we're doing is that we really need trusted messages, trusted messengers, as well as a single entry point into systems. And we do need to take cognizance of how data heavy this content is. So really bringing data light, innovative solutions to learners, particularly the most vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very insightful research. Some of the things that you talked about really hit home, especially regarding non-specialist support for parents. I know I've seen a lot of, parents on WhatsApp complaining and, asking, are we the ones going back to school? We don't even know this material, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting that you brought that up, because Deborah from Dignitas says that they are working in informal settlements in Nairobi to equip educators to support households and overcome the barriers that you're highlighting. They're currently piloting virtual training and coaching tools targeted at educators who are fulfilling the role of community champions and working closely with parents and learners to keep learning and well-being on track. So maybe if we have another session on this topic, we may ask Deborah from Dignitas to give us more insights on what they have also learned. Let me move on. Our next speaker is Stacy. Stacy represents an organization in Nigeria called Edo Best, and it is part of the Bridge International Academies. Go ahead, Stacy. And while Stacy's talking and our next speaker, please, everybody who's listening, put your comments or questions in the chat box. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. So I'm again, my name is Stacey Okei, and I'm Managing Director for EdoBest, which is an initiative that's been led by the Edo State Governor and spearheaded by their SUBEB, which is the government body that manages primary education in the state. So we, as Bridge International Academies, have partnered with them to support the education initiative that they have. And EdoBest is actually a program we just passed our 2-year anniversary. And EdoBest is essentially, BEST stands for Basic Education Sector Transformation, because the governor wants to completely transform his education sector and improve learning outcomes. So we've had a strong foundation of sort of building teachers' tech literacy, and also, so all the teachers in our classrooms have tablets that they use to teach their pupils. And the school leaders also have smartphones that they leverage to be able to manage their schools better. So we have that sort of as a structure in place before COVID-19 came in. We had to start thinking through how to restructure or adapt our program to work at home. So EdoBest at Home is our adaptation, and what we've done to ensure that as many pupils as possible and as many families as possible are able to continue learning even though school isn't in session. So next slide. And then thinking about EdoBest, the EdoBest at Home, the first thing or our primary consideration was thinking about how to ensure that the program is accessible through as many channels as possible. Because while there may be some families who have access to online content, there are also many others who don't have smartphones or who may only have feature phones, so phones that don't have access to data. And then still there are families who don't have phones at all. So wanting to make sure that some of our content is also available via radio. So I'll just walk through the different learning components that we've created here. And they're all adaptations of our regular programming. So the first is interactive audio lessons. So these are literally lessons, 4 hours of lessons that we're creating every day, 1 hour for different age groups. So there's 1 hour for the nursery level, another hour for lower primary, 1 for upper primary, and then another hour for junior secondary. And these are lessons that cover the subjects, the content that pupils would be learning in their regular school day. So science, mathematics, English, social studies, and then also some high stakes exam prep for some pupils who hopefully, potentially may still be able to sit for their exams soon. And this content is available via phone. So parents can literally dial a local phone number and they're connected via like a pretty like simple interface where they can click 1 for the nursery lesson, for example, and they're able to hear the like 1 hour lesson over the phone. These audio lessons have also been uploaded on the government website. And we're working with the government to also be able to make these audio lessons available via radio. And thankfully, the government has been able to partner with MTN, which is the largest telecom in Nigeria, to offer this mobile phone line and also the government website. The phone line is toll-free, and then the government website is at zero data for those who can access it online. The other learning component that we've created is the interactive mobile quizzes. So these are available via WhatsApp and via SMS. So these quizzes cover a variety of subjects, so similar to the ones covered in the audio lessons, and they're available each day. So they're very short quizzes that pupils from primary 1 all the way up to the junior secondary level can access. And it's an opportunity for them just to get some like quick refreshers, go through about 5 to 6 questions per quiz in the different subjects, just to review what they've been learning and see like how well they're digesting the content that they're getting through the different channels. And again, MTN has been really helpful here in ensuring that families can text this number or send SMSs to this phone number, a certain number of texts like each day without any cost to them. Additionally, for those that have access to WhatsApp, it's also possible for them to engage, to complete the lessons, or complete the quizzes via WhatsApp. Then the third learning component we've created is digital storybooks. So these are literal storybooks that are going out to pupils in different grade levels, so that they have a lot of like rich reading content that they can read through, so they can keep practicing and keep enjoying developing their like love of reading. Then the fourth learning component that we've designed are lesson guides at home. So this is where parents are brought into the program, where understanding that parents are not teachers, that they're not specialists, we've designed the learning guides to be really simple and also not be very time consuming. Like so many of these other learning components are things that pupils can do independently. These lesson guides at home are the one thing that we want the parents to work on with their child. So these are lessons, very short lessons they're focused in math and English and then one other subject per day. But we're expecting it takes the parents about 45 minutes to go through this lesson with their child. And these are available via the government Facebook group. They're also available through their webpage, and we're sending them out via the WhatsApp groups. And then the last learning component, which is really powerful, which is also the way that really helping us to communicate or share so many of these other learning components, are the WhatsApp groups or the virtual classrooms that we've created. And we've created two different kinds of WhatsApp groups. One is at the grade level. So literally we have one massive WhatsApp group for pupils in primary 1, another for pupils in primary 2. And in these groups are where we're sharing the digital storybooks, for example, again, that are tied to that specific grade level, as well as the lesson guides and the as well as the lesson guides that are available. And the other kind of WhatsApp group that we have are the classroom level WhatsApp groups. So the class level WhatsApp groups ensure that teachers remain a part of the learning process, because with these class level groups, it's literally groups that the teachers are creating, and they're bringing in they're making sure that the pupils in their classroom are actually a part of these groups. And certainly not all pupils have access to WhatsApp. So for those pupils who aren't able to connect via WhatsApp, the teachers actually give the families calls to ask them, find out which of these learning components, if any, they've been able to access, and also what questions do they have, so that parents aren't left trying to figure out how to manage all these learning components independently, but making sure that the teachers are there as the connection to help the answer any pupil questions that may come up, and ensure that parents feel supported. So those are the learning channels that we've developed. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just highlight some of the learnings that we've had so far. One of the major ones is that a lot of what we're doing should and can continue to be done once we're out of this emergency period. We're currently in conversations with a number of our government partners about how valuable it is to still continue some of these learning components, but perhaps at a lower dosage. So instead of having 4 hours of audio lessons per day, we're looking at maybe having an hour and a half, because at that point, students will have a full day of in-school learning, but it would be really good to supplement that and still ensure that parents feel very comfortable directly communicating with their teacher, so that their teacher is able to give them a call, answer any questions that the child may have about homework. So that's one of the key learnings. Another one is that demographic data is a very, very valuable tool in designing the program. So as part of EdoBest, one of the features of the program has been developing digital records for every single pupil. So even before the start of this pandemic, we had phone numbers for every single child who's enrolled in EdoBest school, which is amazing, because it's allowed us to literally send out links to each of these, everyone, so they'll be able to quickly enroll in the WhatsApp groups. It's also made it easier for us to communicate to them about what's happening. But what we've also seen is that it would have been very beneficial for us to have even more layers of data. So for us to know, for example, how many of these phones are smartphones and how many of them are feature phones. That'll help us better start to plan and understand how many people are likely to be able to access the online content versus those that likely won't, and will need to rely more on the components that are available via SMS or via phone. And then next slide. And one of our key needs, I think I mentioned a couple times that the partnership that Edo State government has been able to develop with MTN, the telecom, has been really powerful in ensuring that parents can access these components in a way that's affordable or free for them. But not all parents use MTN. So one of the things that that we've been working with Edo State on is hoping that they'll also be able to develop partnerships with other major telecoms in Nigeria so that even more families, like if they're on Airtel, for example, is another one, or Glo, that they too would be able to call or access the website without it being very expensive. So that's definitely a major need for us. So I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Really insightful information. And I just wanted to point out that there seems to be a common thread there between your presentation and Henry's, which is one, partnerships that work, and two, that we need data light free content. Data light and data free services for a lot of people, especially those living in informal settlements. We'll now go on to our second poll, and then after that we'll have our last speaker. So the poll question this time, what do you think is the best way to level the playing field for all learners? I'll give everybody a few seconds to fill out that poll, and then we'll move on to the third speaker. Please use the chat box to pose any questions to any of our speakers, and also you can highlight different things on our AVPA Twitter handle, which is _AVPA_. So are we getting any submissions to the poll?
Yes, Nancy, they're coming in. So maybe we can give it another 5 seconds or so for the last few people to put their answers in, and then we'll show the poll. It seems to be working fine now. We'll show it, take another 2 seconds to show the results.
Wonderful. I see a few questions coming in for Stacey and Henry. That's great. Once our last speaker has finished his presentation, then we'll go to the question and answers. Okay, let's look at the poll results. Can I get the poll results? Okay, it looks like 74% of you say that governments should provide the tools to all learning to make study from home possible. And then next in line is zero rate all learning tools so that all children can learn at the same pace remotely. I think that's really important, because I think we all are pretty sure that remote learning will become something that we all have to become comfortable with. Okay, thank you. So we're now moving on to our third and last speaker for today. His name is Mike Kipkorir-Bill. Mike is the CEO of Elewa, and he is based in Kenya. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. So, yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. First of all, a comment on that slide. I was the CEO of Elewa until 30th of April. So I just transitioned into my new venture, which is called Verb Education. I was the co-founder of Elewa, and what we're doing at Verb is very similar to what we're doing at Elewa. The reason I decided to create Verb ahead of Elewa was in order to be able to focus more on some of the things which were really expanding Elewa's mandate beyond where it wanted to go. So it's a discussion we've been having for a long time, and we thought the best decision is to sort of create a new entity, and that's the entity I'm leading now. My co-founder continues to lead Elewa. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so Because of that, therefore, if you look for verb education on the internet, you'll not find us anywhere. If you try to look for anything related to the new entity, you'll hardly see anything. We are using this month to sort of really establish ourselves, but we are active in terms of our work with clients and everything that we do. So just to speak about the current activity, or even before that, the presentation I have, therefore, the presentation I have here, therefore, is a really summarized presentation that just shows some of the highlights of the things that we are doing. So I'll begin with the current activity. It really works, and so teachers, and the teacher, the class, it can as education, corporate level, anyone, education. For us, educators to go to the do this and tools is meant or just around them, but better as opposed to expertise on their various specialized areas. So our training is mainly revolves around creativity in terms of how to deliver tools. Tools are some of the things that we put at their disposal for them to be able to overcome the challenge before them. Now, a lot of times we favor working with tools that exist. For example, we are all using Zoom right now to have this conversation. So these are tools that exist that we really recommend. And in some cases, we actually build tools for them. And I can give you some of the examples of that. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a game changer for us. And the biggest thing that it has changed for us is suddenly conversations are easier to have. So people who are very well established, people who never thought that they needed to rethink some of their models, especially some of our education institutions, which really run on legacy systems and legacy mindsets, have suddenly seen the value of a lot of the things we've been talking about. Now, we do a whole bunch of things, and I'll try, this slide does not necessarily tell you everything that we do, but I can summarize it verbally and use the example listed there to highlight how it is. The main thing we do is, for example, instructional design, content development, and e-learning platforms for entities such as universities. The e-learning has been with us for a long time. I know universities that invested in e-learning in 2006, and to date, they have nothing to speak of. Why is that the problem? The main problem is nothing to do with the technology, nothing to do with the students. Most of the problems, based on the research and the engagement that we've had with these people over time, has always been the lecturers. Like, how do we actually get the instructors in those institutions to be able to come on board? And with one of our clients, we've really made very big steps regarding this. Things to do with lecturer contracts, just the way the education is delivered online, etc. We've really made a lot of progress as far as that is concerned. Now, the other things also that we try and do is, when it comes to the various tools and approaches that we develop, we tend to do, we tend to create prototypes of things. So whenever there's a problem somewhere, like, for example, teachers are struggling to assess students, we tend to work with them to develop a prototype of that. We try to run it as an MVP, and thereafter, if it qualifies, we can run it fully as a product. So, for example, in the technical and vocational training space, this is one of the most difficult spaces to think about how to deliver education online or in a blended way. And that's something that we're working right now with the regulator of technical training here in Kenya and some technical training institutions here to try and see how we can still help learning to go on in that space. Some countries have experience in that, and we're basically trying to see what works best with our context. The other thing, of course, is the is the teacher training for basic education. Once again, we've done some amazing experiments and prototypes in this space. For example, just before this COVID thing, between January and March this year, we held a very interesting teacher training via WhatsApp on competency-based assessment. And we were very surprised by, you know, just how well teachers were actually learning how to do competency-based assessment via a WhatsApp-led training. So just minified trainings that we were able to deliver via WhatsApp, and we're able to also give them feedback based on what they do. So such things. Next slide, please. I'm aware the time is short. So the biggest learnings basically that we've had is people really have the capacity to transform the way they do things, and relatively quickly at that. That I think you've seen it. I don't even need to elaborate it, but people really have the capacity because the will is there right now. The other thing is people are trying out all kinds of different things to be able to do things. But in Kenya in particular, we really suffer from the central command syndrome. You know, like you know, this is government has not directed, or you know, government has not approved, that kind of thing. That has significantly limited the imagination that school managers have. Everyone wants to play it safe. No one wants to try the risky thing. People only want to try that which has, you know, that which they've seen has been agreed to elsewhere. And that I think, you know, we lose so many opportunities and a lot of time that way. It even goes back to this, a certain survey we did about 3 weeks into this COVID pandemic here in Kenya with primary school teachers, and 50% of them said they are doing nothing online. They're doing absolutely nothing. And the main reason for that is there's no directive that they've received. You know, it's not clear to them what they're supposed to do. The other big one, of course, is higher education. Most higher education institutions are really struggling for relevance. They really see it as a big problem, because if a bigger university can do a program you've been doing online and do it better, not even a bigger university, anyone, if they're doing the same thing you've been doing online, you know, you're in deep trouble. So there's really a big struggle for relevance, and we are trying to help people there. And finally, the Commission for University in Kenya, I believe, finally will be able to change some of their thinking about online education, and basically to help universities to pivot to the new space. Because there's, for example, a requirement in Kenya that to be a university, you have to have 50 acres of land. So, you know, and that really stops very many people just from innovating, especially, you know, as land becomes more and more difficult to get, and education can be done in a blended way or in partnership with others, you know. So all those are the difficult things. So next slide, please, for help needed. The biggest help I think we need for us is, since we do a lot of experiments, and since we try to really run very many prototypes on how to deliver all sorts of aspects of education, sometimes we put things on hold because it's simply not worth it to be able to do it. So, you know, if we can find a partner with whom we can run some of these experiments really quickly, that can be amazing. And also instructional designers and content developers is a big need we have, because imagination, creativity is not a very easy thing to have in this market of ours, mainly because of the way people have traditionally been trained. So that is a big area that we really normally invest in as, you know, as a company. We always really try and invest very hard in growing our people and making sure that they can be creative so that they liberate themselves and they can be able to reach out to people. Yeah, that's just about it. And just a final comment on the survey we did with primary school teachers. When we ask them what they therefore need in order to be able to do something different during this COVID pandemic, about 42% of them say that they need training on how to deliver using technology, obviously. About 25%, which is the next group, says that they basically need overall training on pedagogy, which is the science of delivery. And about 17% say they need help to be able to think and deliver creatively. And something that surprised me was about 8% of them say they would like training, or they would like some help on how to curb loneliness. That was a very big surprise for me. And maybe loneliness is not the right word, but that's how it came out from them. But I think there's a lot of psychological effects that this has had on them. You know, as teachers, you're used to being able to deliver in a certain way. Now you have to deliver in a different way. So yeah, that really surprised us, and that was, I thought, was an interesting thing. I'd like to stop there because of time, and happy to take questions, etc. And thank you all for listening and for having me here.
Thank you very much. Your last comment, Mike, is it might have been, you know, a surprise in your research, but interestingly enough, there've been some chats. Some people have been chatting on the side about that exact comment, that exact issue, basically saying that continued learning is not possible without acknowledging the psychosocial issues affecting children and caregivers, like food insecurity, increased violence, depression, all these things. And I realize, you know, the learning issue can't be standalone, but we couldn't include everything in this one webinar. So we will be discussing some of these issues. In fact, our next week, we're hoping to discuss gender violence and domestic violence, because, you know, that is escalating due to COVID-19. So these are definitely issues that we know are affecting people, while they're also trying to keep up learning. So thank you very much, Mike. Great. I see some questions have come in. I see some questions have come in for Henry and for Stacy. If you have any questions specifically for Mike, also please put them in the chat box. So we'll go to the question and answer section of our webinar now. I know we're running a bit late. We may spill over the hour set for this webinar. Whoever's interested in staying on, please do. Henry, we had a question for you. What are the different approaches available for different learning phases that are not too overwhelming for learners and parents? Basically, you know, balancing between the sound science behind learning, but also, you know, what people are going through.
Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and I think let me just start by saying that what also came out in our content curation process is that there was a preponderance or a dominance of content available for the higher grades. So typically your senior secondary, grade 10 and 11 and 12, and not as much for the lower grades. There was also there tended to be a focus on the maths and the science rather than some of the other subjects. So that was the one thing that came out. In terms of the differentiated approaches, look, I think that's something that everybody's grappling with in terms of how do we then apply low-tech solutions. I know the Siemens Stiftung people are in the group today, for example, and one of the initiatives and through the STEAM Foundation here in South Africa is around cooperative learning and hands-on, minds-on science learning. And now this is something that we're grappling with as, I think, everybody in responding to how do we deal with what would normally be a very tactile learning experience in terms of setting up experiments. So how do we now look at simulations and other versions of this, but really without taking away the quality of learning that should be happening in this kind of subject. So I think it's something that we are grappling with. And definitely there is a disparity in terms of the grade levels. And I think I'd also like to just touch on the psychosocial support, because I think what we saw with the lack of a parent, sort of like a really good quality parent guide that supports parents to ensure learning in the home, is that there are also the social and emotional learning aspects which need to be addressed. So, I mean, I don't have an answer, but certainly it is something that came out in the work that we were doing.
Great, thank you very much. Stacy, a question for you. Are you able to track how students engage with lessons and other material on your platform, or how are you measuring engagement and gains?
We are. So the SUBEB team, so the government team, is able to track traffic on their website to get an understanding of how many people are downloading the materials, as well as like where those people are coming from, like whether it's in Edo State or actually from like other places in Nigeria or outside of it. In addition to that, we're able, through the WhatsApp groups, we're able to see, understand the level of engagement, how many parents are understand how many parents are actually in the groups, how many parents don't have access to the groups and need to be called by the teachers. Then the third way that we're able to track usage is through the phone line. So being able to see how many SMSs are going out, because each like SMS is tied to the actual phone number. So knowing how many students are engaging in the interactive quizzes through that, and then as well as understanding how many calls are being made to the phone line to get the audio lessons.
Okay, what on average, what are you seeing? How high is engagement?
So I can speak most to the traffic that we're seeing so far on the website. Well, I'll start by explaining the figures for Edo State generally. So we've just, just speaking of government schools, there are government schools from nursery level all the way to junior secondary. There are 357,000 pupils across the state. And in those numbers, we've been able to, I can talk to you in terms of percentages, not the like absolute numbers in terms of like how many people are using it. So what we're seeing and what we're working with SUBEB to change is that a lot of the traffic so far that we're seeing is coming for the online content is coming from a good proportion, like 20% is coming from Edo, but then a significant percentage of the traffic is actually coming from Lagos, which is interesting. But we think it has a lot to do with the fact that in Lagos, like they tend to like have families who have more money and it's easier for them to access the website. But it's also that we're like working really closely with teachers and also the headmasters to ensure that there's good communication so they understand what's available to them like on the website. Because a lot of the Edo families, they're getting it directly through the WhatsApp groups rather than going to the website to get it because it's shared to them directly. Whereas people outside of Edo State, like they're not in the WhatsApp group, so they can't, the only way for them to get it is through the website.
Okay. Thank you very much. A question for you, Mike. One of our listeners disagrees with the view that universities are struggling to remain relevant. Yeah. He just wanted to know are you working directly with universities in metropolitan hubs, and are they seeing this opportunity to really shift?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. The situation here in Kenya is interesting because of the way supply of students into universities is controlled. For example, the last 3 years, government has only allowed about 100,000 students to be admitted into the 73 universities we have in the country here. And you find that last year, for example, there was a lot of pressure to even merge some programs, close down some programs, shut down some institutions, that kind of pressure that came up. So right now, like with the university we work with right now, they are a bit afraid because they're a relatively smaller university that is in a metropolitan area. They are afraid that some of their competitors or some of the other universities which offer similar programs could take away the students they would traditionally have taken because of geography advantages, simply because they are a bigger brand, a better name. So there's that struggle for relevance. That's what I meant. It may not necessarily be the case elsewhere, where maybe there's a lot of pressure on universities to admit even more and more. But in some of the cases, at least with the cases that I'm dealing with right now, that's a real issue. Like the struggle for relevance, how do we make sure that we can offer things that are good? The other thing that I see also along these lines, and this is maybe just further down the road, e-learning will very quickly become a commodity, meaning it will be, everyone can deliver it, everyone will be claiming they can deliver it and do it. So the issue is going to become what kind of e-learning are you delivering? How good is it? How effective is it? How does it engage people? How does it help people transition into work? So that I think is part of the struggle for relevance, because a lot of these bigger entities or entities that can train thousands at the same time may not necessarily be able to transmit a quality program, as somebody has said there. Yeah. So yeah, indeed, that's maybe what I meant by the struggle for relevance.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's been some conversation in the chat also about quality, as opposed to, you know, is it available on certain devices? Why are we not really thinking about quality? So that's a good point you raised, Mike. Yeah. Henry, we have a question for you. What's the role of private sector in expanding access to education? What do you think that is? Apart from, we know the telecom companies have you know, played a big role, but what do you think private sector can do? What else can they do to expand access to education?
Well, I think, I don't know what the situation is like in the rest of Africa, but certainly in South Africa, the private sector is a significant contributor to education, certainly on the non-profit education side of things. So organizations working to support non-profits working in education. And a lot of that work is around supporting the system and supporting system change. So, but I think under the COVID-19 situation, I think we reflect on that particularly. I think it's really, so besides the telcos, as you say, is to continue to support nonprofits working in education so that they can support the most vulnerable, because that is really where the big gaps are. So being able to close that gap, for example, we're working with some of our partners to deliver paper-based resources to parents to support learning in the home. And I think this is a critical gap that needs to be closed. But I think also just to say that if we think about system change, and one of the important things that we need to maybe use this as an opportunity, and I think there's some very interesting work that came out of the Civil Society Coalition, for example, around how do we build back better. So let's not go back, let's not return from the COVID-19 lockdowns and the close. So if we're going to, we've sacrificed so much, and our children have sacrificed so much during this time. Let's not go back to the same failing systems that exist. Let's try to build back better and make sure that we use this disaster as an opportunity to put pressure on government, to put pressure on maybe the corporate sector and other civil society organizations to really support a better system in the future. One that, should another pandemic, should another disaster face us, that we're not going to be having these conversations to say, why are our most vulnerable affected the most?
Henry, I think you made the perfect closing remarks. Those are really great remarks. How do we build better and not go back? And we know that if it's not another COVID-19 crisis, there will be something that, you know, that affects us across the world and maybe even regionally. So we need to start thinking about even past COVID. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I wish we had more time. I do want very quickly, if Margaret, you could go to the last slide, just to talk about I have a few announcements before everybody jumps off. Good news is that we had, in one of our webinars, we actually had one of our speakers get some support from one of the banks in Kenya. LifeSong was able to connect and has now donors who are helping feed and give money to more than 30 families, needy families in some of our very densely populated informal settlements like Kangemi, Kibera, and Kawangware. So that's great news. We're really happy to hear that LifeSong Kenya were able to get some support. And then talking about upcoming webinars, as I mentioned before, we do want to have, our next webinar will be on the subject of gender and domestic abuse, because we realize, you know, people can't even learn if those kind of things are going on in the homestead. So we do want to address that issue. And the one following that, the week after, we'll have access to affordable and adequate healthcare in informal settlements or highly densely populated areas. And again, we'd like to have representatives from across the continent, especially Nigeria and South Africa, because we have offices there. We'd love to have people speak on those subjects. So if you have any ideas on who you'd like to hear from, please let us know. We are also thinking of possibly changing the format a little bit of our webinars, and we'd like, by a show of hands, we'd like to know what people think. Somebody had actually suggested that the format should be more like a hackathon roundtable, where we try to find tangible solutions that can be easily and quickly implemented. If you like that idea, please put your hand up and give us 1 or 2 suggestions regarding the particular problem you think we need to hack. I can see already 1 or 2 hands up. Give us some ideas on the problem you'd like us to hack. And then last but not least, AVPA, we are now putting out a questionnaire, which will be sent to you shortly, asking about your ideas for pre-COVID initiatives. As Henry said, we have to start building, we have to start thinking past COVID-19. We've seen what it has done to our economies and our communities. So what are the opportunities that we need to look at to start preparing for a post-COVID world? So we will be sending that questionnaire out, and we hope you will have time to answer a few questions and give us some ideas. At the bottom of your screen, you can see there's information there if you want to get in touch with any of us at AVPA. Myself, Nancy, there's Rachel Keeler, Toyin in Nigeria, and in South Africa, Dr. Frank Aswani. I think our CEO has left us. He had a hard cutoff, but I just want to, on his behalf and on behalf of our partners, Sankalp Dialogue, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a great discussion, and we hope you will continue to give us your feedback. Let us know what you like, what you dislike, and where you'd like us to go from here. Thank you so much.